Fearghus and I'm very happy to be able to participate in the Modes of Capture Symposium. So thank you to everyone who made it possible. I hope you're all well wherever you are. Last month I took part in Sous Influence, which is an online version of a participatory choreography and format that a French choreographer called Eric Min Kwang Castain created. It's a guided immersion into a kind of clubby trans dance, transgenerational dance together. And I think Eric is brilliant at making work like that. It's very generous, very considered. And even though we were all joining via Zoom, I really enjoyed the sweaty freedom of it, dancing in my spare room where I've taken down the lampshade because my arms kept on hitting it. And at the end of the session, Eric asked us all to sense in our own bodies all of the bodies that we had touched and that had touched us over the years. And I found myself quite emotional at the thought of that. I realised that in this moment of physical isolation, that I am drawing heavily on all of the traces of other bodies that have made my body. The movement patterns, the choices, the habits, the knowledge of others that I've seen, that I've touched, that I've danced with, have informed my capacities. I move and I recognise others in my movement, and I smile, enriched, but also a little sad that I don't know how I will reinforce or top up those influences. Because to say that our bodies are made through others is not to adopt a wholly social constructionist account of where bodies are a blank page to be written on by bigger forces that deny us agency and remove ethical choice from us. I am made through others, but I have made choices about which others I open myself up to or invite to influence me. And in that ongoing process of making and performing my corporeal self, I have an agency, which is not the same as control. And so instead I tend to think of it as a kind of skilled improvisation where the roles of leading and responding are shifting between the movers, and perhaps with a speed and clarity and sensitivity that makes it impossible to tell who is leading and who is following. So, in contrast to an ideology which I'm afraid I've probably accepted and reinforced for much of my career, I am not independent. I'm not an independent artist. I'm not an independent body. In her book, Artist at Work, Bojana Kunst shows how the artist, and particularly the mobile dance artist, has in fact become the model worker of the neoliberal economy. Creative, flexible, communicative, what she says, incessantly active in all its possible forms and in the realization of its potentiality. Against that isolating and exhausting vision of independence, I want to acknowledge our corporeal interdependence, which offers me a different kind of ethics with which to imagine how I might respond to the world in which we find ourselves right now. So, to explain a little bit of what I mean in all of that, I want to share a project called Cure that I premiered at the Dublin Dance Festival in 2013, so it seems appropriate to be doing it in this context. Cure was a piece I set about making to figure out what it takes to recover. Seems like research that would be very relevant to me right now. So it's quite nice to get a chance to go back to it. Like now, the idea of recovery was very much in the public domain in 2011 and 2012 when I was thinking about the project, as Ireland was still trying to make its way back from economic collapse, from a loss of faith in the political and religious authorities, and perhaps from a loss of faith in ourselves as citizens who had somehow been complicit in all that had gone wrong. Recovery had a very particular personal, physical resonance for me as well, as I was returning to dance, having had knee surgery to repair a torn meniscus, a tear that finally manifested itself when I was dancing on the concrete floors of the Ireland Pavilion of the Shanghai Expo in 2010. my body couldn't keep performing in the nation's attempt to attract global investment in conditions that didn't support that body properly. It declared its vulnerability. It declared that it needed more care. There's a geographer and philosopher called Paul Harrison who argues that, and I quote, vulnerability describes the inherent and continuous susceptibility of corporeal life to the unchosen and the unforeseen. Its inherent openness to what exceeds its abilities to contain and absorb. So instead of thinking of bodies as endlessly capable and active, to recognize their frailty, their fragility, their tiredness, their illness, opens up the possibility to others of acknowledging reliance, my reliance on them. So ostensibly Cure was a solo for me, but to make it, I commissioned the 5 dancers and visual artist who had been involved in the previous work I'd made with them called Tabernacle. So Michael Aristegui, Bernadette Iglich, Matthew Morris, Elena Gianotti and Stefan Isler were the dancers, dance artists, and Sarah Brown, the visual artist. I asked each of them to make me a 10-minute solo on the idea of Cure, and they all took different approaches to that. And I assembled those solos into a single kind of 65-minute piece. I'd known all of the dancers for a long time, having created, rehearsed and performed alongside, on top of, underneath them, except for Elena, with whom I'd worked for the first time on Tabernacle, but whom I'd seen perform often in the work of Michael Clean for Dagda and for Rosemary Butcher. They had created with me and carried my choreography over the years, and what I call my choreography took form through their thinking and feeling and moving. With Cure, I wanted to more clearly acknowledge their creative agency and my dependence on them. Maybe to shift the traditional apparent power relationship between choreographer and performer. And I wanted to put my own body in play, so to not be the godlike absence invisibly directing action from the outside, but to be a vulnerability visible in the work. I'd like to think that the dancers always felt that collaborative and equal power relationship in our work. But with Cure and with the communication around it, I wanted to make that absolutely visible to others outside the process and make that visibility part of the overall curation and choreography of the project. To shift away from those maybe older structures of power structures of making work also felt right, because I thought recovery couldn't be about going back to old structures. My knee would never be the same as it was before surgery. So moving on demanded that I do things differently. In practice for the process of creation, instead of gathering all of the choreographers to me as might have happened if I was the choreographer, I travelled mostly to where they were. To Australia for Stefan, to Berlin where Mikel was based, to London for Matthew and Bernadette, to Dublin with Elena, and to Limerick with Sarah. Our working processes would have probably suited an era of social distancing, since there were usually just 2 of us in ample studios with minimal physical contact in the creative process. The material was generated through my response to their instructions and stimuli. And I have to say, I think all the movement material came from me, and yet responding to their ideas, it was absolutely shaped by the atmosphere of their creative processes. And knowing them through the years and seeing them, I think I carried something of each of them into the work too. Even Sarah, whom I don't know as a dancer, obviously, she's a visual artist, I actually know that she's a dedicated long-distance swimmer. And something of her physical practice informed how I responded to her choreographic input and invitations. That was actually mostly communicated through the latex material, latex kind of rubber that she introduced into the creation. I look back on Cure now, on the care, and I know that the Latin root for cure is curare, which means to take care of. I look back on the care that the choreographers took of me, and of the challenges they set me. And I have to say that I think I have never felt more at home in performance than in that piece. So through them, through otherness, through going through their processes, I felt most at home in my own performance in front of others. Care, Karen Till tells us, challenges the Western Enlightenment assumption that individuals are autonomous and self-supporting, forcing us to recognize that not all humans are treated equally in society. Taking care and allowing oneself to be cared for acknowledges and enacts interdependence. I experienced this care from each of the choreographers, but also from the whole creative team. After the initial phase of creation with the choreographers, I assembled the work in the studios of Dance House with Mags Corskaden as stage manager, there as a constant presence to witness my otherwise solo rehearsals. And Al McKelleher as composer and Kieran Amelia as designer became regular allies in the rehearsal room, offering the support of accompaniment, that of their design and creative skills, yes, but also their presence. And we tried to offer some of that experience of care to people beyond the creative team too. Just before the premiere at the Dublin Dance Festival, we held a supper with Create and with Dublin Dance Festival in the Fire Station studios on the idea of cure. And we made food for a group of people who signed up to share their own experience of recovery in a beautifully philosophical and personal ways. They shared insights, and in sharing those insights, that could be a resource for me in my performance of the work. I remember the whole Dublin Dance Festival team and some Create members helped to make and prepare the food, and I'm especially grateful to them for recognizing how this work of taking care, of providing food, of comfort, was already part of the choreography that we were making. We actually continued this practice of sharing food and discussion when we toured the work around Ireland. And this process of sharing the work, not only the choreography, but some of the shared conviviality, helped assert that performing Cure wasn't just a commercial transaction for venues between audience and performer, but a work of shared reflection and experience, with care activated in both directions. I'm reminded in all of this of the phrase in Irish, trína chéile. And trína chéile means upset or in disarray. And so when we use it in Irish, it often has a negative meaning. But literally, it means through one another. And for me, there is a positive potential in this kind of trína chéile of otherness. Because disarray and upset actually allows for a new array, for a change of old habits, a shifting, an upsetting of old patterns. And it is the surprise of otherness that makes these new things possible and maybe makes new things, better. The risk of never being in disarray is that nothing ever changes and everything remains the same. So in thinking about what it takes to recover, which is never a going back, but always a moving on from where we are, I think the surprise of otherness, the others in my body, is a really helpful way. Now, I've focused primarily today on human others. Of course, non-human factors, environment, place, animals, all of those things also help to make the bodies that we experience. I'm recording this from Walthamstow in London, where I live, and in 2017, 2018, just down the road, I was artist in residence at the Walthamstow wetlands, which is the largest urban wetlands in Europe. And the residency was focused on that idea of interdependence between humans and non-humans in this both protected space for wildlife, but that is also a working reservoir, so absolutely a man-made, human-made space. And in a way, when I look at that practice and some of the solo, which was primarily a solo practice, I can see that in my future of recovery, that's probably some of the things that I'll go back to, a kind of dance with environment, with human and non-human actors. And there are lots of benefits to thinking about our kind of interdependence with that greater environment. However, as I know that that's the way back to dancing and creating that I'll probably take first, I still think about and really want to draw on that human interaction, which has made me and which I hope will continue to resource me in the future. Take care. Slán.